This is the Ethanol Report, the industry podcast from the Renewable Fuels Association since 2008. I'm Cindy Zimmerman. There was a lot of buzz around biofuels at the 2025 Farm Progress Show in Decatur, Illinois this past week, with a record corn crop literally surrounding the venue. USDA Deputy Secretary of Agriculture Stephen Vaden talked a lot about biofuels on the Farm Progress Show main stage with Mike Pearson of This Week in Agribusiness, touting some of the recent positive actions taken by the Trump administration.
Well, I think it's fair to say that the second Trump administration has been the most pro-biofuels administration that we've had. We at USDA are very supportive of the Environmental Protection Agency and the proposed renewable volume obligations. We think those numbers are wonderful and are where they need to be and meet the current ability of America to produce biofuels. But we're even more excited about the proposal that they have recently put out for public comment to reallocate those RINs that are being waived because of the small refinery waivers, which EPA is legally required to provide.
So, Deputy Secretary Vaden, before we go further, we're going to take a step back. That was a lot of stuff we just unpacked. RINs, we're retiring them, we're waiving them. Break us down. These RVOs, this is how much we have to blend for renewable fuels into our supply. But what else were you talking about? Why does that matter to the farm crowd, waiving RINs and reallocating? What does that mean?
So let me break it down into normal English. Thank you for stopping me. So, talking too much like a DC person. So, the renewable volume obligation, simple. That's the amount of biofuels we need to produce at minimum and be blended into our fuels in this country every year. EPA sets that on an annual basis. There's a provision in the law which says for certain small oil refineries, they are entitled to receive a waiver from having to participate in this program. That means they don't have to blend biofuels into the petroleum that they refine. In the past, that has essentially been lost volume.
Yep.
So in other words, if you had a renewable fuels obligation of 1 billion gallons, and 100 million of it were waived because of the small refinery, in reality, you'd only be producing 900 million gallons. And so that would be 100 million gallons of lost biofuel sales. Now what EPA is talking about doing is, okay, these small refineries, they won't have to blend the 100 million in my example, but we're going to reallocate it. In other words, redistribute the obligation to blend to larger refineries which do not get a waiver. And that means instead of losing the 100 million gallons in sales for biofuels, and of course that goes straight to corn and soybean farmers, that's going to be used, will be made, and will be blended. So that's a win for American ag. So we are excited that after having agitated for that for years, that EPA is proposing it, and we hope that everyone in ag will submit comments supportive of that during the rulemaking process ongoing.
Vaden also talked about the potential for increasing U.S. ethanol exports.
Well, as you know, with regard to the trade agreements that we've already announced, there's $700 million in additional ethanol purchases that the United Kingdom has agreed to, and Japan has actually agreed to purchase sustainable aviation fuel from us, which is a product that we definitely hope to be able to export and that this administration strongly supports. So when our trade team is going into these countries, they are not just saying, please buy more from American agriculture. They're taking data from USDA, and that data is telling them what are they currently purchasing from us and in what amounts, what are they currently purchasing from other countries that we could be providing to them instead, and what should they be purchasing from us that they are not. And so when our trade team sits down with these other countries, they're saying, we want you to purchase, just like with the United Kingdom, this many $100 million more of this specific commodity. And those are the types of asks that are being made, and USDA's data is being used to help generate those asks. And you can rest assured that both Secretary Rollins and myself, whenever we talk to the trade team, agriculture, we're making certain it's top of their list. And given where we see commodity prices are right now, you can rest assured that a lot of that emphasis is on row crops. We need more corn, more more soybeans, more ethanol being purchased by people overseas, and that's what should be at the top of our trade agendas list.
The Renewable Fuels Association was out in force at the Farm Progress Show, talking with farmers on the ground and the media about what's new with ethanol, and especially how ethanol can help move that record corn crop forecast by USDA. Chuck Zimmerman spoke with RFA President and CEO Geoff Cooper.
Geoff, first of all, we're here at Farm Progress Show in Illinois. Why is it so important for RFA to have a presence here?
Well, Chuck, I think this is probably one of our best opportunities of the year to really get a pulse on how farmers are feeling, right? And we are, in the ethanol industry, one of the largest customers for corn farmers. We're using 5.5 billion bushels of their product every year, and it's good to know where your suppliers are coming from and how they're feeling. And so this is a great opportunity to talk to the grassroots, hear what's keeping them awake at night. And obviously, the crowd here this year is a little more downtrodden and a little more apprehensive than normal, and it's understandable. I mean, we're looking at a mountain of corn coming in this fall, record crop. I mean, we can debate on whose yield number is right and how big the crop's going to be, but I think everybody agrees this is going to be a record crop, more than 16 billion bushels. And there's a lot of concern about where's all that corn going to go. Demand is not keeping up with supply. We've seen the ethanol industry historically serve as that outlet for increased productivity. And farmers year after year after year are harvesting larger and larger crops, getting more corn per acre, higher yields. And the ethanol industry has done a good job of keeping up with that growth. Historically, you look back the last several decades, we've done that. There's concern now about where do we go from here. The ethanol industry is being stifled in terms of growth. The government is moving too slow or not moving at all on expanding markets for ethanol. We have seen some wins in the export market, and we're seeing growth in ethanol exports. But in terms of domestic consumption, Chuck, we've got to get legislation across the goal line this fall that permanently allows year-round E15 nationwide. That is the low-hanging fruit. That is the one thing that Congress can do immediately to help boost demand for corn and expand the market for ethanol.
Well, there's lots of news that's come out in the past couple of weeks for the ethanol industry, and you kind of just touched on a really important part of that, obviously with the corn crop. How about last week the EPA announced its decision on the backlog of small refinery exemptions under the RFS. RFA called the approach reasonable, but there is some concern about how the agency will reallocate the gallons for the granted exemptions. What's the story there?
Yeah, that announcement was a little bit of a mixed bag, and I'm going to go back to what this means for the farmers who are here at this show. The renewable fuel standard has been a tremendous demand driver for ethanol in the last 20 years, and by extension, it's driven demand for corn and soybeans. But again, to keep that growth going, we've got to have RVOs, we've got to have RFS volumes that the marketplace has confidence in, and that those volumes continue to grow. We saw EPA earlier this year put out a proposal for 2026 and 2027 that had the highest ever volumes for the RFS, and that's great. But the other shoe that we knew was going to drop at some point is what are they going to do with all those pending small refinery exemption petitions. We finally started getting some answers last week, and EPA did grant a lot of those petitions. They gave exemptions out to a bunch of refiners for previous years. That's the bad news. Last week's announcement was a bit of a mixed bag. The good news is those exemptions for prior years, we don't expect will really have any impact on the marketplace. We don't expect it to cause any kind of reduction in renewable fuel production or use, because the approach EPA is taking is, giving RIN credits back to those refiners that are expired. And so those RIN credits have no validity, they have no life, they can't be used in place of physical volumes of renewable fuels moving forward. So that's the good news. I think the way EPA is going about this is responsible. Certainly we dispute the assertion that refiners have experienced any kind of harm that would warrant an exemption. But if EPA is going to give exemptions out, we think the way they're going about it is reasonable and shouldn't have any practical impact on the marketplace. They are also proposing very soon their approach for reallocating any exempted volumes for future compliance years and compliance years that are still open, the current compliance years, 24 and 25. So if that all comes out the way we hope it does and we expect it will, then these exemptions shouldn't have any real impact on renewable fuel demand. It just kind of changes around the edges who is responsible for blending renewable fuels and demonstrating compliance to EPA.
There's been a lot of activity in the export arena lately, first with the Section 301 investigation into Brazil's trading practices. RFA provides comments on that action being taken by the U.S. Trade Representative. So tell us about that.
Well, yeah, we were, I think, very encouraged to see the U.S. Trade Representative initiating a Section 301 investigation on Brazil that includes Brazil's unfair treatment of ethanol imports from the U.S. We did submit comments, again, supporting what USTR is doing. I'll also be testifying at a USTR hearing in D.C. next week, again, offering our support and encouragement for them to proceed with this investigation. Brazil has an 18% tariff on U.S. ethanol, and that has effectively shut us out of their marketplace. It was once our largest export market, but between their tariff and their treatment of their own low-carbon fuel standard program, which is called Renova Bio, they are basically shutting out U.S. corn-based ethanol. So there are absolutely, without a doubt, unfair trade practices occurring in the Brazilian marketplace. So we're glad to see that our government is responding to that and going to get to the bottom of it. And if we need to, institute reciprocal treatment. Brazilian ethanol has been coming into the U.S. essentially duty-free. We sort of roll out the red carpet for Brazilian ethanol. We give them advanced RIN credits under the RFS. We give them a lower CI value under the California LCFS. So for too many years, Brazilian ethanol has been prioritized in our market over U.S. corn-based ethanol, and that's got to stop. And the administration clearly understands that, and we are glad to see them taking steps to put an end to it.
We've also seen action taken in the past month by the Trump administration on trade deals with EU, Japan, Indonesia, and RFA is co-sponsoring the upcoming Global Ethanol Summit in D.C. in October. Talk a little bit about the overall trade picture and what countries you hope will increase markets for U.S. ethanol.
Well, ethanol exports continues to be the real shining star in our demand picture. We continue to see growth in exports. We had record exports last year, 1.9 billion gallons of U.S. ethanol exported in 2024. We're going to break that record in 2025, so that's great news. That's, again, continuing to press demand and open and expand markets for ethanol. But we've still got work to do there. We've seen, I think, some really positive developments in the trade deal frameworks that have been announced by the Trump administration. The UK deal, for instance, has a really nice allotment, a tariff-free quota for a substantial amount of ethanol going into the UK. We need to see more of those agreements finalized and put in place. We know there's ongoing negotiations with India and Japan and Vietnam and Colombia and Peru, and all of those could result in additional opportunities for U.S. ethanol imports. And again, I think we take comfort in the fact that ethanol has been front and center in the Trump administration's negotiations with those trade partners. They understand that exporting more ethanol is a great way to reduce our trade deficit, and especially our ag trade deficit. So that's been great news and something we've been very excited about, and we hope to see continue. So we're doing great in the export market. We got to boost domestic demand.
What about the 45Z tax credit? It was one of the few items rescued from the Inflation Reduction Act, but we still do not have guidance from the Treasury Department on it. When do you expect that, and what are you recommending for your ethanol plant members regarding that at this point?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. The 45Z tax credit was not only maintained, but it was extended in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It was one of the only clean energy tax credits to get maintained and certainly I think maybe the only one that was extended. So that was great news for the industry. But in terms of implementing that tax credit program, our industry is still flying blind for the most part. We need additional guidance from the Treasury. We need rulemaking from the IRS so that our industry understands exactly how to claim that credit, what sales qualify for that credit, how to measure carbon intensity. There's just a lot of questions still hanging out there. And again, remember, January 1st of this year, that tax credit became law. So, our industry should be able to claim that tax credit for their production in 2025 if they have their ducks in a row and they have the right data and information. The problem is we don't know what that is. IRS hasn't told us yet. So we're still waiting for additional guidance from the IRS, and we need that as soon as possible.
The push to expand E15 nationwide remains the ethanol industry's number one priority right now, and especially the potential to finally get it into the top market in the country, California. RFA Senior Vice President for Industry Relations and Market Development, Robert White, says they're in the process right now of preparing retailers in California to start selling it the minute it gets approval.
Well, we've been obviously trying to get E15 into the state of California for years now, and the main reason is because of the amount of fuel that's consumed in that state each year. It's the number one fuel market in the country, and right now it's the only state that does not allow E15 to be sold. And so those two paths we want them to collide and allow the market to have access. And we all know the price of fuel in the state of California is outrageous, and with the closures of the refineries and the new additions of some taxes that have been added this year, I think everyone knows that the price of fuel in California is set to climb drastically in 2026, and there's simply not a lot of levers that the California legislature and the governor himself have to pull, but E15 is one of them. So whether it's action that is close to finish within the legislature or by CARB itself, we think E15 is getting close to the finish line. And so we know that there is a strong appetite for information about how to sell E15, how it's worked, what are the lessons learned, what are the pitfalls, where are the potholes that others have stepped in, how can we jumpstart the E15 business case and get it, really hit the ground running, I guess, in California. And so we are going to start that the first week of September, which is just next week at the CFCA Summit, which is the largest fuel retailer association in the state, and start off a series of workshops for the entire fuel supply chain, but mainly focusing on fuel retailers.
So those are part of the educational efforts that you're doing in order to try to get this to come through.
Yeah, it's going to be during next week. It's really going to be kind of 1 hour workshops. There's a lot of activities going on, so we know we can only hold their attention so long, but after that summit, we'll be working our way across the state and holding much longer workshops that will go through everything from the basics of what the fuel is and how it's been done in other parts of the country, how it can legally be done and safely, obviously, what are the blending economics, what is the potential lure for the consumers, how can you differentiate yourself with E15, but then back to the retailer themselves, what is the incentive for them to do it? Is there more money to be made? And in a state like California, the answer is yes, because not only do you have the general savings that we see in other states, but you also have the low carbon fuel standard. And there's other incentives that are built into the blending economics in California that other states don't have. So there's a lot of different things going on. And then we'll go through the equipment and explain to them what equipment is compatible and how they can work through that. And then finally, what are the requirements at EPA and what do we expect out of CARB when the final rulemaking gets done? So this is really an A to Z type of approach. We want them to be armed. E15 is not yet approved, but we know it's coming, and so our goal is to make sure that we have a laundry list of retailers ready to go, prepared, and maybe their equipment ready to go, so that all that's left is to put some labels on and drop the fuel into the ground. Do
you have sort of like a target when you are, finishing these kind of efforts, and when you think that might actually come to fruition?
Well, the target date for the first drop of fuel, if the stars align perfectly, that could be in yet this year. And we do have some retailers that have told us that, as far as equipment-wise, they are down to hanging hardware, which is simply the breakaways, the swivels, the hose, and the nozzle that hangs outside of the dispenser cabinet. So that's a few $100s and dropping in the fuel to get them going and put some labeling on. So I think if we are indeed to a legal state in California, that we will have fuel flowing very quickly. Some of these will most likely be an E10 replacement, so the regular unleaded will be E15. We'll move the E10 over to their premium selection, so they will have a product for everyone going by, even a lawnmower jerry can, if you will. But I think what we're going to see is once that first retailer moves, the marketplace will move probably faster than any other market that we've seen, just because of that price point. E15 is selling at a 9% discount nationwide. You add in all those other factors in California, and it'll be even more than that. And, that California market, if it was to go from E10 to E15, it's an additional 800 million gallons. And as we sit here at Farm Progress, looking at the corn crop going across the Midwest, that's another 267 million bushels of corn. So California is not to be trifled with when you think about E15 in the market that's out there, and why RFA is making this its number one priority as far as market development for the coming weeks and the coming months.
Before we close, anything else you want to talk about?
I think it's important that we make a lot of jokes about California, but it is extremely important market for corn and ethanol, and we will keep everyone updated on the progress that's going on. But we do have 11 workshops scheduled throughout the state. We're scheduling webinars as we speak, and I can tell you that as soon as we opened RSVPs, our registration system for that first one, it was almost sold out on day one. So the interest is high. There's going to be a lot of information seeking going on, and we're just going to make sure that the retailers have that information. And like I said, we're trying to jumpstart this market as quickly as possible so that we can soak up some of those gallons.
RFA was also talking about higher blends at the Farm Progress Show with the return of flex fuel vehicles, both new models and conversion kits to do it yourself. Policy Counsel and Director of Government Affairs, Jared Mullendore, says there's a lot of interest in getting more vehicles on the road that can use up to 85% ethanol.
Well, we've been coming here for years, and we get one of the top questions every year is, where can I buy a flex fuel vehicle? I miss my flex fuel vehicle. What are you guys doing about that? And we've, of course, as you've covered, been doing a number of things about that over the years. But right now, we've got two examples that kind of surround the issue. So first of all, we have a brand new Chevy Trax that is a from-the-factory flex fuel vehicle. Not with a big flashy logo and a big campaign about what it can do, but we want to get the word out to people to say, yeah, you can buy a new, full warranty, brand new flex fuel vehicle. It's the Chevy Trax, Buick Envista, and I believe it's an option on a Trailblazer. So that's great. However, we're at a farm show, and we're often getting asked about pickup trucks, right? So we're also, just across the booth from that Chevy Trax is a brand new 3/4-ton Chevy Silverado, and it required a little aftermarket work. So we used one of our associate members, and we have two who do this, one of their kits that converts the vehicle really easily. It's about a 15-minute install at this point, plug and play, and turns it into a flex fuel vehicle, makes it know what to do with the extra octane.
Yeah, I looked at it, and it's not only does it seem like this is not a difficult thing to do, but it's kind of fascinating how that works so that it works properly in this engine.
Yeah, really. It's the engine, this particular truck that we have, is offered as a flex fuel vehicle from the factory, but they're very tough to get your hands on. They're sort of for fleet purchases only. If you do a special order in the wrong time of the year, it might not be an option. That's the sort of thing that we had been telling farmers here for the last few years is, well, if you try real hard, you might be able to buy a Chevy. And now it's like, well, you can also take this route and just go buy one off the lot, and if it has any of the 3 V8s. So what that tells you is that there's not that much different about the engine to be able to handle the fuel. It's the same componentry. It's just a couple of lines of code that tells the air sensors and the fuel system what to do with a different blend and a different octane.
So with the some of the farmers or maybe some of your members who are here at the show, what kind of questions have they been asking?
Well, of course, they're asking about flex fuel vehicles because we got two shiny ones right out in front of them. But I think the bigger thing right now here is just the size of the corn crop that's coming in. And that takes us into an all of the above posture on what we can do to grow markets. We think the easiest place for your head to go is E15. That's your easy button, right? Grow demand that way. Flex fuel vehicles, of course. As you get that fleet growing, more of these kits going out the door and more Chevy tracks rolling off the lot, that enables people to buy that higher blend and create that market demand. And of course, the trade conversation is lively. It's really everything.
I talked to a guy earlier today here at the show that has been traveling around in multiple states and corn areas, like here in Illinois, for example, just saying that he's just seen the crop just looks great. Even though there's been some weather issues, they've kind of overcome that.
Well, that's the thing is, you see some regional spots, but overall, we're just seeing those reports, and there's sort of a range still in this, and who's gonna see what. But if we're having to brace for price impacts, that's when you really start needing to talk about market expansion.
So what are you going to do when you go back home?
I'm going to tell Washington what I've heard from farmers. That's really why I get to come out here. The real reason we get to come out, my family's in the Midwest. I usually visit them, but the real reason that I'm out here is because then I get to take stories straight from the farmers' mouths, and and I get hundreds of them over the course of 3 days standing out here, and we're taking them to the White House. We're taking them to members of Congress and saying, let me give you a real anecdote about how this situation is landing on the dinner table at the people you report to, your bosses.
And that's it for the Ethanol Report this time. Thanks for listening.